Hello, Brovs. We're going to attempt to read In the Dark here from Clarice Lispector's Near to the Wild Heart. I believe this is chapter 13. Yes, chapter 13. The Little Family. Before starting to write, Ottavio arranged his papers neatly on the table and tidied himself up. He was fond of these little gestures and familiar habits, such as old clothes, in which he could move with earnestness and assurance. Ever since his student days, this was how he prepared for any task. After settling at his desk, he would put things in order, and his conscience enlivened by the motion of the objects around him. I mustn't get carried away by any grand ideas. I'm also a thing. He allowed his pen to run somewhat freely to rid himself of some persistent image on reflection that might possibly try to accompany him and impede his train of thought. For that reason, to work in the presence of others was torture. He feared the absurdity of these tiny rituals, yet could not get along without them, for they sustain one as much as any superstition. Just as in order to live, he surrounded himself with do's and don'ts, rules and exceptions. Everything became easier, as if taught. What was fascinating and terrifying about Joanna was precisely the freedom in which she lived, suddenly loving certain things or in relation to others completely blind, without as much as using them. For he found himself under an obligation when confronted with what existed. Joanna was right when she said that he needed to be possessed by someone. "You handle money with such intimacy," Joanna had teased him once as he was paying a bill in a restaurant, and she had caught him so unawares and given him such a fright that, in the presence of the waiter, no doubt smirking, the notes and coins had slipped from his hands and scattered at his feet. Although no ironic comment followed, well, to do her justice, Joanna doesn't laugh. She still had an argument ready from then on, but what was one to do with money except keep it in order to spend it? He was annoyed, embarrassed. He felt that his argument was no reply for Joanna. The truth is that if he didn't have any money, if he didn't possess the right credentials, if he didn't love order, if the law journal didn't exist, a vague outline of his book on civil law, if Lydia were not separate from Joanna, if Joanna was not a woman and he was not a man, if, oh God, if everything, what would he do? No, not what would he do, but to whom would he turn? How would he decide? Impossible to slip between the blocks without seeing them, without needing them. Breaking the rule he adopted when working, a concession, he took up pen and paper before he was actually ready. But he excused himself. He didn't want to lose that note. It might come in handy someday. One needs to be blind to some extent in order to perceive certain things. Perhaps that is the mark of the artist. Any man is capable of knowing more than he does and of reasoning with confidence, according to the truth. But it's precisely those things which escape one in the light. In the dark, they become phosphorescent. He thought a little. Then, despite the concession going on for too long, he jotted down, "It's not the degree that separates intelligence from genius, but the quality. Genius is not so much a question of intellectual power, but the form in which that power manifests itself. So one can easily be more intelligent than a genius, but he's the genius. How childish that he's the genius." I must see if I can apply this discovery in relation to Spinoza. Was it really him? Every idea that occurred to him, for he would familiarize himself with it within seconds, came with the fear that he might have stolen it. Fine. Now for some order. Having laid aside his pencil, he told himself, "I must get rid of these obsessions. 1, 2, 3. I deeply regret suffering as I do amidst the bamboos of the northeast of this city," he began. I do as I please, he continued, and no one is forcing me to write the Divine Comedy. There is no way of being other than the way it is. The rest is useless. Embroidery and just as embarrassing as those heavily embroidered angels and flowers with which Cousin Isabel used to decorate my pillows. When I was distracted and she would come like a purple, idiotic cloud, guess what I'm thinking? Say what? What? 4 more times. What? Like this, don't run away. What did you say? You're still alive? You're still not dead? Yes, that was it. I mustn't run away from myself. I mustn't run away from my handwriting, how delicate and horrid it is. A spider's web. I mustn't run away from my defects. I adore you. My virtues are so few, like those of other men. My defects, my negative side, is as beautiful and hollow as any abyss. What I am not would leave an enormous hole in the ground. I don't conceal my mistakes. While Joanna doesn't make mistakes, there is the difference. Say something, fellow. The women look at me. The women, my mouth. I let my mustache grow again. They die of happiness and a deep love filled with plums and prunes. I buy all of them without money. Money I keep. If one of them slips on a banana skin there in the road, all one can do is to feel ashamed. Nothing is lost. Nothing is nurtured. The man who can feel this, in other words, who doesn't simply understand but adores, should be as happy as the man who truly believes in God. In the beginning, it hurts a little, but then you get used to it. The person writing this page was born one day. It is now precisely a few minutes past 7 in the morning. There is mist outside. Beyond the window, the open window, the grand symbol. Joanna would say, I feel myself to be so inside the world that I appear not to be thinking, to be adopting a new method of breathing. Farewell, such is the world. I am me. It's raining in the world. It's a lie. I'm someone who works with my intellect. Joanna is asleep in the bedroom. Someone must be waking up at this moment, Joanna would say. Another is dying. Another is listening to music. Someone has gone into the bathroom. Such is the world. I intend to arouse the feelings of everyone, to call upon them to share my compassion. I live with a woman who is naked and cold. I mustn't escape. Who looks into my eyes? I mustn't escape. Who watches me? It's a lie, but it's the truth. Now she's in bed sleeping. She's overcome with sleep. Overcome. She is a slender bird in a white nightdress. I intend to arouse the feelings of everyone. I don't conceal my mistakes, but let everyone shield me. He sat up straight, patted his hair down, remained serious. Now he was going to work, as if everyone were standing by and nodding with approval, closing his eyes in agreement. Yes, that's right. Very good. Someone real was disturbing him, and on his own he became frustrated and nervous, for everyone was looking on. He gave a little cough. He cautiously moved away the inkwell. He began, the tragedy of modern times is man's vain attempt to adapt to the state of things he has created. He sat back in his chair, looked at his notebook, straightened his pajamas. Imagination is so essential to man, Joanna once more, that his entire world finds its raison d'etre in the beauty of creation and not in its utility, not in being the result of a series of objectives conforming to his needs. That is why we find an increasing number of remedies aimed at uniting man to existing ideas and institutions. Education, for example, which is so difficult, and why we continually find him outside the world he has created. Man builds houses to look at, not to live in, for everything follows the path of inspiration. Determination is not a determinism of objectives, but a strict determinism of causes. To play, to invent, to pursue, the ant to its anthill, to mix water with lime in order to see the result. That's what one does when one is small and when one is grown up. It's a mistake to believe that we attain a high level of pragmatism and materialism. In truth, pragmatism, the plan directed towards a genuine and given objective, would be understanding, stability, happiness, the greatest victory of adaptation which man can hope to achieve. Meanwhile, to do things so that strikes me, in the face of reality, as being the kind of perfection one cannot expect of man. The beginning of everything he construes is so that man's curiosity, dreams, imagination, these have formed the modern world. Following his inspiration, man has blended these ingredients, invented combinations. His tragedy to have to nourish himself with them. He was confident that he might be able to imagine in one life and find himself in another, set apart. In fact, that other life continues, but its purification over the imagined one works slowly, and a man on his own cannot find foolish thought on one side and the peace of the true life on the other. One cannot think with impunity, Joanna thought, without fear and without reprisal. Would she finally possess madness, or what? She could not tell. Perhaps only suffering. He paused, reread what he had written. Don't step outside this world, he thought with a certain ardor, not to have to confront the rest, simply to think. Simply to think and go on writing. He didn't mind being asked to write articles on Spinoza, so long as no one obliged him to plead in court, to look at and contend with those offensively human beings lining up and shamelessly revealing themselves. He reread his notes from earlier readings. The pure scientist stops believing in what he likes. The need to like things, the mark of mankind. One must not forget the intellectual love of God is the true knowledge and excludes any mysticism or idolatry. Many answers can be found in Spinoza's statements, in the idea, for example, that there can be thought without extension, the modality of God, and vice versa. Surely the soul's mortality is affirmed. Of course it is. Mortality as a direct... Let's start again there. Of course it is. Mortality as a distinct and reasoning soul, the clear impossibility of the pure form attributed to the angels by St. Thomas Aquinas. Mortality in relation to the human, immortality through the transformation in nature. Within the world there is no place for other creations. There is merely the opportunity of reintegration and continuation. All that could exist already exists. There is nothing more to be created unless revealed. If the more man evolves, the more he tries to synthesize, to abstract and establish principles and laws for his life, how could God, in any acceptance, even that of the conscious God of religions, be without absolute laws for his own perfection? A God endowed with free will is inferior to a God with only one law, just as a concept and all the truer when it is only one and does not need to be transformed before each particular case. God's perfection is more readily proved with the impossibility than the possibility of miracles. To work miracles for a God rendered human by religions is to be unjust. Thousands of people have the same need of this miracle at the same time, or to recognize an error, amending it, which, more than an act of kindness or proof of character, means to have erred. Neither understanding nor volition pertain to God's nature. Spinoza affirms, that makes me feel happier and gives me greater freedom. For the idea of the existence of a conscious God leaves us horribly dissatisfied. At the top of my essay, I should put a literal translation from Spinoza. Bodies distinguish themselves from each other in relation to substance. He had shown the phrase to Joanna. Why? He shrugged his shoulders without seeking any deeper explanation. She had shown herself to be curious. She had wanted to read the book. Ottavio reached out his hand and grabbed it. There was a sheet of notepaper inserted between the pages. He looked at it and discovered Joanna's indistinct handwriting. He couldn't resist looking closer. The beauty of words, the abstract nature of God, just like listening to Bach. Why did he prefer not to have written this phrase? Joanna always caught him unawares. He felt embarrassed, as if she were clearly lying, and he was forced to deceive her by saying that he believed her. To read what she had written was like standing before Joanna. He evoked her, and avoiding her eyes, he saw her in movements of distraction, her face white, vague, and delicate, and suddenly a great sadness descended upon him. What am I doing after all? He asked himself, and he didn't know why he had so suddenly rounded on himself. No, you mustn't write today. And since that was a concession in order not to be questioned, he questioned himself. If he wanted to, could he honestly work? And the reply was definite. No. And once the decision was more powerful than himself, he felt almost happy. Today, someone was giving him respite, not God, but someone very powerful. He would get up, tidy his papers, put the book back on the shelf, get into some warm clothes, go and see Lydia, the consolation of order. How would Lydia receive him? Before the open window, watching the children walk to school, he saw himself take her by the shoulders, suddenly in a temper, perhaps a little forced, when confronted by that same question. What am I doing after all? Aren't you afraid? He had screamed at her. Lydia had remained impassive. Aren't you afraid of your future, of our future, of me? Don't you realize that being simply my lover, the only place you have is at my side? She had shaken her head, surprised and tearful. But no, he had given her a good shake, remotely ashamed at having shown so much force. When in the company of Joanna, for example, he would say nothing. Aren't you afraid that I might leave you? Don't you realize that if I should leave you, you would be a woman without a husband, without anything, a poor devil, who one day was jilted by her fiancé and then became his mistress when he married another? I don't want you to leave me. Ah, but I'm not afraid. He had looked at her in amazement. She was getting thinner, he noticed, but she still looked healthy. Despite everything, she was more nervous, much given to weeping. Readily became emotional. Suddenly he had burst out laughing. Honestly, I don't know what to make of you. Lydia, too, had laughed, glad that it was all over. He had been intimidated by her radiant expression. He had drawn her close to him rather than look into those eyes, and they stood there for a moment in each other's arms, wishing for different things. And now Lydia would receive him as always. He wrote a note to Joanna, letting her know that he wouldn't be home for lunch. Poor Joanna. He could tell her if he wished. She would never know. She completely wrapped up in her blind conceit. But he would protect her ferociously, he laughed, his heart pounding. Never mind, tomorrow he would write something definitive for his article. He looked at himself in the mirror before leaving with half-closed eyes. He observed his well-shaped face, his straight nose, his full, fleshy lips. But after all, I'm not to blame for anything, he said, not even for having been born. And suddenly he didn't understand how he ever came to believe in responsibility, to feel that constant weight at every hour. He was free. How simple everything became at times. He made his way onto the street, went to buy some sweets, which he chose carefully. He finally decided on a fairly large bag of boiled sweets, apricot-flavored. The moment he got round the corner, he would suck the first sweet, his hands in his pockets. His eyes filled with tenderness at the thought. Why not? He asked himself, suddenly irritated. Who said that great men don't eat sweets? Only in biographies are those details never mentioned. Suppose Joanna were to know what he was thinking. No, to be frank, she had never been sarcastic about. He felt a moment of anger before walking more quickly. Before turning the corner, he took the bag of sweets and emptied them into the gutter. In distress, he watched them merge with the mud, roll to a dark opening covered with cobwebs. He continued on his way, walking more slowly, shrunken. It was a little cold. Now someone would be satisfied, he thought remotely, like a punishment, a confession. Even great men are only truly recognized and honored once they are dead. Why? Because those who praise them need to feel themselves somehow superior to the person praised. They need to feel they are making some concession, from which there stems a patent superiority. The person who is praising has succeeded in holding his own. There is even a certain condescension that finishes up as pity, Ottavio told her. Lydia was observing him in one of his ugly moments. Those thin lips, that wrinkled forehead, his foolish expression. Ottavio was thinking, and she loved him at this moment. His ugliness neither excited her nor aroused her pity. It simply drew her closer to him, and with greater happiness. The happiness of wholly accepting, of feeling that she was uniting all that was true and primitive in herself to someone, independent of any preconceived ideas about beauty. She recalled her former schoolmates, those girls who were always so lively, who knew everything, were up to date with the latest films, books, love affairs, fashions, those girls with whom she had never really had much in common, withdrawn as she was, never really having much to say for herself. She remembered them and felt certain that they would find Ottavio ugly at this moment, for she accepted him to such an extent that she would have preferred him even uglier in order to give even greater proof of his effortless love. She looked at him, paying no attention to what he was saying. It was reassuring and good to know that between the two of them there were secrets weaving to a delicate, transparent life, over that other life which was real. Who would ever have imagined that Ottavio had once kissed her on the eyelids, that he had felt her eyelashes on his lips and been forced to smile? And miraculously she had understood everything without either of them saying a word. Who would have guessed that one day they had loved each other so much that they had remained quite silent, grave and still? Both of them gathered inner knowledge no outsider ever probed. He had gone away one day, but it didn't matter all that much. She knew that they both had secrets, that they were both irremediably accomplices. Were he to leave her, were he to love another woman, he would leave her and love another woman, only to tell her afterwards, even if he should tell her nothing. Lydia would play a part in his life in any case. Certain things don't happen without some consequence, she thought, looking at him. Let him escape. He will never be free. Once, as she was falling, he caught her, smoothed her hair with a distracted gesture. She thanked him, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. They smiled into each other's eyes and suddenly felt themselves overcome by sheer bliss. They began walking more quickly, wide-eyed, and in a daze. Perhaps he no longer remembered that moment. She was the one who remembered such things. The fact is that those moments were so special that one couldn't recall them when speaking, not even when thinking with words, only by pausing for a moment and savoring them once more. He might forget. In her soul, however, there would certainly remain a mark, clear and rose-colored, engraving the sensation and that afternoon. As for her, each day that dawned brought her in its waters more memories on which to nourish herself, and little by little the certainty of happiness, of having achieved her goal, slowly surfaced inside her body, leaving her satisfied, close to saturation, close to anguish. When she saw Ottavio again, she now looked at him almost with indifference, finding him inferior to what he had given her. She wanted to confide her happiness, but she was somehow afraid of hurting him, as if she were confessing that she had betrayed him with another man, or as if she wanted to flaunt her happiness before this man who divided himself between two homes and two women, to show him that her happiness was greater than his. Yes, she thought remotely, staring at him, there are indestructible things that accompany the body until death, as if they had been born together. And one of those things is what has been created between a man and a woman who have shared certain moments. And when her son was born, she stroked her belly, which was already filling out. The three of them would form a little family. That was what she wanted, as a happy ending to her whole history. She and Ottavio had been brought up together by their mutual cousin. She had lived close to Ottavio. No one had passed through her life except him. In him, she had discovered man before knowing anything about men and women. Without giving it much thought, she had vaguely assembled the male species in Ottavio. She had shared his life to such an extent that she had never sensed the presence of others, except as closed worlds that were alien and superficial, always at every stage close to him, even during that phase when she had become astute, hiding as much as she could, even when there was nothing to hide. Also, during that phase when people stared at her on the street, and her chums accepted her, admiring her lovely thick hair, Ottavio pursuing her with his eyes, that certainty, never more to be effaced, that she was someone. That was when she became aware that she was not poor, that she had something to give to Ottavio, that there was a way of surrendering her life to him. Everything that she had been, she had waited for him. When she had caught up with him, Joanna had appeared, and he had fled. She went on waiting. He had returned. A child would be born. Yes, but before the birth took place, she would demand her rights. To demand her rights struck her as being a phrase that had been dormant forever inside her, waiting until she found her strength. The strength. She wanted that child to bud between its parents. And at the heart of all this, she wanted for herself the little family. Pardon, my hand is killing from holding this phone for so long. Oh, hold on. She smiled weakly, listening to Ottavio holding forth on some topic of which she had lost the thread. Ever since the fetus had started to form inside her, she had lost certain quirks and developed others. She dared to press ahead with certain thoughts. It seemed to her that until that moment she had spent her life telling lies. Her movements were independent from her body, as if there was now more space in the world for her existence. She had to look after the child and Ottavio. Now, if there was. She leaned back more comfortably in the armchair. Her embroidery slipped on to the carpet. She half closed her eyes and her womb expanded, sated and glowing. She relished this sense of well-being, this feeling of lethargy, which now frequently came over her. She hadn't experienced the slightest nausea, not even at the beginning, and she was confident that the birth would be easy as anything. She ran her hand over her hips, which hadn't lost their shape so far. Somehow she rather despised other women. Ottavio caught a glimpse of her expression and felt alarmed. Dispassionate cruelty. He studied her expression without being able to decipher it, aware only that he was excluded from that hovering smile, for it was a smile, a horrible smile, satisfied despite the fact that she had kept her face straight, her eyes open, looking straight ahead. He was gripped by terror. He almost shouted, "You haven't even been listening." Lydia sat up with a start, once more submissive. You haven't even understood what I was saying," he repeated, staring at her, breathing with difficulty. Would there be repetition of the scene that took place that time? No, there was a child inside her. Why should I have a child? Why me? Me of all people. It's strange, she would ask herself in the next breath. What am I doing after all? No. Not only do I understand you, she said in haste, I love you. She sighed imperceptibly, still somewhat alarmed by her bid for freedom. The truth is that She had never entirely come back to him, as before her pregnancy, and he himself had given her this kingdom, fool that he was. Yes, but once she had freed herself from the child, once she had freed herself from the child. A few minutes later, his calm restored, Ottavio gave in to the lethargy and weakness which so admirably sustained his relationship with Lydia. I didn't think my wrist was going to make it. That was painful. I'll never read laying down again. All right, bruvs, that's all. Goodbye.